All right, evening, folks. I'm glad you decided to tune in here and join me. If you don't know me, my name's Dwight Gallian, and that's my real name. I go by other names on occasion. Sometimes I'm Duncan McKinnon, sometimes I'm Benjamin Curtis, but my true name, if you don't know it, is Dwight Gallian. And I got into storytelling. I don't know when I got into storytelling. I think I've told stories as long as I can remember since I was little growing up. I was born in Illinois, but moved to Mississippi at a very early age. And I would listen to those old characters down there tell their stories and spin their yarns. And I guess I just kind of fell into it that way, listening to them. And I lived there for nearly 40 years of my life. So when people ask me, about my stories and my storytelling and how I got into it and how you have so many stories and stuff, and I say, well, you don't live in a place like Mississippi, down in the Delta for all those years and not have stories to tell. So that's really sort of how I got into it, just listening to those other ones and then just jumping right in myself and telling stories on myself and about myself, and it's just taking it from there. And then over the years, I've read many things and tried to remember what I read and maybe take a story that and change it up a little bit, make it fit, the area or whatever like that, because, you go to a lot of different places and there are very many stories in those places that are very similar, that are folk tales and stuff, and tales and stories like that. I'm a firm believer that a lot of those folk tales and a lot of those stories and myths and legends and things like that have a little bit of truth about it. They start somewhere. Maybe as time goes by, they get really exaggerated or, just really way out there. But I like to think that some of them had a little bit of beginning in truth. And to me, that makes it even more interesting. I think, to think that, oh, could that possibly be? That might make that story just a little bit more interesting. It's like one time when I was a young man living in Mississippi, I had an invite to go out to, if you know anything about hunting or anything like that, and I hope no one's, this bothers anyone too bad, but I was asked to go out to a deer camp and to go out there and spend some time. And I was either in the 8th or 9th grade. And so I decided to go. I thought that'd be a good experience for me, and my friend would be there. And I didn't actually go deer hunting that year when I was out there like that year and being that young. But I remember one evening a bunch of old guys got together and a bunch of old coon hunters. And it was on a place called Island 66, which is an island off of Mississippi. At some times when the water is very low, you can actually drive to that island, but other times you have to take a boat to get to it. Well, there was a bunch of old guys out there with their hounds and their dogs, and they were old coon hunters. So they took me and my friend out one night on a coon hunt. Now, they had a couple of old dogs. They had a blue tick and a black and tan, and that was about all the dogs they had. But they built a fire, and they sat about the fire for a while. And they talked about things, and I listened to them tell stories and, recount old hunts and things and stuff like that. Well, the old dogs, they struck a trail, and they started obeying and bowing and just letting up a ruckus and running through those old backwater swamps and bayous. And well, we decided to listen, and pretty soon, if you know anything about it, you can tell the difference when a tree a coon, their bay, their bark sounds different. So they had treed, and we run out through that old swamp, and they'd treed a couple of old coons up that tree. Well, we harvested those and set the dogs loose again, and same scenario, it happened over again. We're waiting and listening and stuff. Well, pretty soon we get to the area where they've treed this time, and they look, and there's a big old coon up in that tree. And if you know anything about coons, sometimes old hunters call big old male coon, big old boar coon. That's about one of the big old boar coons I've ever seen in my life. And I'm out in the woods at night, out in the backwater swamp and bayou with all these old guys, and they're old seasoned hunters, And here I am, a young kid, hadn't done much at this particular time. I was like many of the other young men at my time, and in that area, if you've ever experienced, you might know what I'm talking about out there. If you're a hunter yourself, or you enjoyed the woods or camping or anything. You know, when you're a young man, you think you need a big old knife. The bigger the knife, the better. Well, I wasn't any different. I learned since then that that's not necessarily true. So, but I had an old K-bar Bowie. I don't know if you ever seen one or not, but it was a big old Bowie knife, and it had J Bowie stamped right into the blade. Now, it had a stag handle on it, and I tell you what, it was one heck of a knife. At least I thought it was. It was so big. So I was carrying that on my side. Well, as the story goes, that old coon, he was up in that tree, and they gonna try to shoot him out of that tree, but they missed, and they hit the old limb that he was on, and bark flew and stuff like that. And I guess it stung him enough that he just bailed out of that tree. Well, when he hit the ground, he had a tussle with that one old hound, a little female, and she's old blue tick, and he made easy work of her, pushing her aside. And when he did, there was an opening, and the only opening that he could see was right through me. And that big old boar coon, he come a running straight at me. And it was dark, and all those old guys and the hounds and everything. And I whipped out that old knife of mine, and I threw it at that coon. Now, I just expected to hit that coon and stun him or make him turn and go another way, because I didn't want that coon going over top of me. But as luck would have it, I stuck that coon to the ground with that big old Bowie knife. And I mean, it was nothing but luck. Well, that coon bailed and bawled for a couple of seconds and then stone cold dead. Those old hunters, they were besides themselves. They went to slapping each other on their shoulders and back and saying, "Did you see that boy? Did you see him? You see what he did? I can't believe that. I've never seen that. Did you see?" They didn't know it wasn't nothing but pure D luck. And when I saw their reaction, I'm going to tell you, even as a young man, I wasn't about to let them know that that's what it was nothing but pure luck. So I walked over there, put my foot on that old coon, extracted that Bowie knife, wiped it off on my pant legs, and stuck it back in its sheath. And I turned around and looked those old fellas right in the face. And I said, "Let's go get another." Well, I was told many years after that those old guys around the campfire out there on Island 66 at their hunting camp still tell a story about the night that the old boy killed a coon with his Bowie knife. So that's an experience that happened to me. It actually happened. I know it's kind of hard to believe. One of my friends got asked one time, said, "All them stories Dwight tell, are they true?" And my friend Bruce, he said, "You know what? The more outlandish those stories sound, the more apt they are to be true." But I don't know if that's the truth or not. But anyway, that's just sort of a little bit of background about me and how I got started in my storytelling and about things. And yeah, I did many things down there, many tales and stuff to tell, experiences, those experiences that sometimes people don't get to have in life. And I was fortunate enough to have those and to be able to listen to those men and older gentlemen and stuff that were excellent storytellers. And I guess I just soaked it all in and became one of them. And I like to remember the stories. I find some stories more fascinating than others. I like spooky stories. Many people ask me sometimes, why can you tell a scary story? And I say, well, I can tell a scary story. But the question is, would it be scary to you? Some things scare some people and some things don't scare other people. I found out from another experience of my own. After I got older and I took up hunting and deer hunting, and I don't know if you know anything, down in Mississippi, they talk about the further south you go, I'm sure you're aware of, in Florida, they call a mountain lion a panther. Now, he's not black, he's just a mountain lion, but that's one of the more deep southern names for a mountain lion, is a panther. Other places they were called wildcats. Other places they were called painters. In the Northeast, they referred to them as a catamount, which is short for cat of the mountain. Well, there were always tales about panthers in those swamps down there in Mississippi. Don't know that they were all true or not. And usually you hear the tales of, the Black Panther. And so anyway, the story that I'm about to tell you ties in with what I was speaking about earlier about, what scares you? I'm a firm believer that when you're telling a story, and there's certain things that don't need to be told. There's certain areas that need to be left blank. There are certain places where you let the participant, the person in the audience, the person that's sitting out there, whoever he or she may be, you let them fill in the gaps, because their own mind can scare them worse than you could ever think about scaring them. And this is an example of that. It's another example that actually happened to me one time when I was hunting. Some of my friends, many of them, by the time it got dark, they was already back to the truck. But I tried to stay out there until it got dark. An old saying down there is about dark 30. So I'd come back well after the sun had gone down. And there was a certain area where we were hunting back behind the levee. And there was a logging company that owned most of that land, but they had hunting leases on it. And so there were logging roads in and out of that area. Many of them ran very close to the sloughs or even up, near the river. But this one particular night, we'd been out there hunting, and I was hunting with a muzzleloader. At that time, I was using a percussion gun, and I waited till it got dark, and I started to return back. And I knew where the truck was parked. My friend would be there already waiting on me, I'm sure of that. And we went black. They cut me off. I didn't touch anything. There. Oh, I'm sorry. I had to have some help here. So we're still, all right. I don't know what happened. We just kind of got cut off there for a minute, but I had someone come in and help me with it that knows a little bit more than I do. So anyway, I'd been on, and they got fairly dark. Like I said, I usually waited till way after, like I said, dark 30, and I started walking out the old logging road. Well, that logging road happened to run by a slough, and that slough, as the logging road was laid out, there was a little stretch of woods between it and the slough. Now, in one place it was pretty wide, but when you got up around the curve, past that curve is where my friend should be, and he should be there in his truck, probably waiting on me already. So I'm walking out, and I'm walking down that road. Now, when it got to the curve in the road, that little area strip between the water, the slough, and the road got very, very narrow. But as I was walking along, I don't know, maybe have you ever had this happen to you? Around about dusk, dark, or maybe earlier in the morning, or maybe even in midday, you might be out taking a little walk, and maybe through a wooded area or something like that. And you just kind of get that feeling that you may not be alone, and you may actually hear something like footsteps. And that's what was happening with me. As I was walking, and it was pretty dark, and I couldn't see very well. It was a moonless night, clear sky and a lot of stars, but not a bright moon. And as I was walking about, I could hear what sounded like footsteps just on my side. And as I would walk, it would walk. And then when I would stop, it wouldn't exactly stop. That's why I knew I wasn't exactly just hearing the echo of my own footsteps, or my imagination was taking over, because it would make a couple of extra steps, and in those dry leaves, you could hear it. You could hear it go, and then it would stop. I would pause and wait for a minute and peer into that darkness in there and see if I could see what it was, but I knew it was something on four legs. I thought, well, it's probably just a deer. So I kept walking. And whenever I would continue to walk, it would continue to walk. And I would stop after a bit and listen. And there would be those couple of extra little footfalls after I had stopped. And as I got closer and closer to that curve in that road, and the woods began to narrow down, it got to where I could see a shape. And the shape that I saw sort of made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, because of all the tales and stories that I had heard. It looked like an old black panther was trailing me down that old logging road. And here I am at night with a muzzle-loading gun, a percussion gun, got one single shot, can't see those sights very well. I knew not to run, so I just continued to walk, and I watched, and as the woods began to get narrow and narrow, and when I got just about to that curve in the road, this creature, this I knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, in my mind, it was a panther. And that panther was going to kill me, eat me, and my friend up around that curve wasn't going to know anything about it. So what I formulated in my mind to do was, because about that time, it jumped right out into the road in front of me, dropped its head and began to slink towards me. And I just decided, I got to point and aim this thing. I can't see the sights very well. And I've got to wait till exactly the last moment. And before I pull that trigger, and I had my hand on that hammer back at full cock, had my hand on that trigger, and that creature got closer and closer and closer. And about the time I figured he was about to spring, and I began to squeeze that trigger. And when I began to put pressure on that trigger, I heard, it was an old hound dog that had gotten turned around and mixed up out in that woods, old dark colored hound. And he was probably just about as happy to see me as I was him. It wasn't no panther at all, just a dog that had gotten himself lost out there in that swamp. I grabbed a hold of him and his collar, and I said, come on, buddy, we're going to walk out together. So that's that part of that imagination. I was scared. I'm not going to tell you I wasn't. I was scared to death. I figured I had it that night, that I was going to become panther bait. But it was my mind that convinced me of that. It was my mind that scared me, that terrified me, because it was that unknown. There was just so much that I could see. There was so much that my senses could tell me. And it was those blank things, the things that I couldn't fill in. That's what was frightening. That's what was scary. Now, so, that's enough about me and about, some of my stories and things and stuff like that. We hear many, many tales and things and stories throughout the years. Everyone has a story to tell. Every culture has stories to tell. Growing up down there, like I said, they had many different beliefs and things and stuff. People up here, many of them that I've run into, they don't really know when I speak of something. Down south, there was two kind of things. There was a ghost and a hang. Well, now a ghost is like what everybody envisions a ghost to be. Well, I won't say everybody, because I don't know what everybody's idea of a ghost is. But most of the things is it's an apparition. It's a vapor. It's a not a solid, tangible thing. It's something like you can see through it, and it's usually light and color and stuff like that. So that's a ghost. But down there, they also have what they call hang. Now, the difference between the ghost and hang is the way to explain it to young people, especially today, and someone that's not brought up. It'd be more like what you think of as a zombie. Now, they call them hangs. They come back in the clothes they were buried in, and they are in an awful state of decay, and their clothes are just, raggedy and falling off of them. And if you drive around in the countryside out there, you can tell the people that believe those things and believe them, because there'll be you take old tenant house or someone that lives far out in the country like that, and you'll see down there now, you'll see they'll have a mirror on the porch or a piece of a mirror. And there's a purpose to that mirror on that porch or that piece of that mirror. That hang is so frightening and so ugly that if he sees his own reflection, it scares him and he runs off. So see, that's the way that they protect their home, from a hang. Now, I was dating a young lady one time going to school in Memphis, Tennessee. She lived in a boarding house, and they had gone up in the attic, and up in the attic, they had found a portrait because of a story or legend that they had heard about that old house. It's one of the oldest houses on the street there. It's right off of Popular Avenue. And up there, I believe it was on a trunk, they found an old picture, and they turned it over, and it was a picture of a portrait, a painting of an old lady. And that's about all that was in that attic. Nothing like what they had heard of, and tales and stories that they had heard of. And in that portrait was a lady that was a nice looking lady. She wasn't, elderly, but she wasn't young either. And when you first looked at it, the young lady said, well, it's sort of a Victorian era with a high collar and lace collar and stuff. But the longer they looked at it, they said the more eerie it seemed. The look in their eyes and the feeling that they had. And so it frightened them. And they laid it back down and went down and closed the door. Well, the story is that after that night, they began to hear footsteps and noises in the attic, walking around up there. I was going to go up that weekend, and the young lady asked me to come up a little bit earlier because they wanted me to go up in the attic and check this out. So, she had told me the story, and, I'm thinking to myself, if this happened to them, what makes them think I want to go up in that attic? But here I am about 18 years old, dating a young lady, and you got a boarding house full of young ladies, and I'm not about to let them know that, I'm a little bit scared about going up in that attic. And so when I got up there, I went up in the attic. And when I looked at that portrait, it basically the same thing happened to me as did them. At first, I thought, it's just a portrait of a lady. What is the problem here? She's a nice, evil, sinister looking lady. The more you looked at it, there was just something about it. So I remember them telling me that when they first saw it, it was laying face down. So I turned it back over face down and laid it back down on the chest that it was on and went down. Now, they told me after that they no longer heard the footsteps or commotion or movement, up in the attic. So was there something to that, or was that just their imagination? It was a very old house, and old houses tend to creak in the boards, when they shrink and swell with the weather and the humidity. But they said before that time they had never heard sounds like footsteps and things in that attic. But then they said when I replaced it the way that they found it, the sounds and the noises went away. So, yeah, who's to say? Now, I know you probably heard stories throughout the day from other people and stuff, Native American stories and things and stuff like that. Many of the different stories of the Lenape or the Delaware people, they have many tales to tell. And here locally, there's a tale about, where Anderson, Indiana is? I'm sure you do. Named after Chief Anderson. And there's the mounds that are up there. And those mounds are very old and very ancient. And no one really knows that from what little bit of excavation and stuff that they had done, they don't believe that they were burial mounds. So the census is that they were ceremonial mounds, but nobody really knows what they were used for. The Delaware people didn't build them. They were very ancient. They were there when they got there. But an amazing story has been around for years. If you ever go to Anderson and go to the mounds up there. At one time, one gentleman, he bought it and owned it personally. He actually opened like a little amusement park there. And he had a carousel that was on top of the main mound. But there begin to be tales and stories that were told that if you walk the trails and woods and along the White River, that people began to say that they saw little men, little beings in the forest and the woods peeking from running between the trees and stuff. And they were just like regular people, except they weren't but about 2 feet tall. And they either had long purple or long maroon robes and blue robes that they wore. And they would see, and whenever they found out or they noticed that you had actually seen them, that you could see them, that they would run deeper into the forest and hide. Now, a lot of people thought that, this is something that was made up recently, but actually it's not. The stories of that date way back in even into the 1800s and before, these little beings that goes up there. And what I find very interesting about that, when like earlier when I talked about those things, the Delaware Indian, they talked about little people that inhabited the forest. And one of their names for them was Wematanika, and that meant little warrior. But another one was Tunganaxi, which was not quite as, you can imagine, little warrior was a good one. That was someone that you wanted to meet. And he would only show himself to the people that deserved that were honorable and respectful and things and stuff like that. But the other one was Tunganaxi, and he was a wood dwarf. So, I question and ask myself, are these little beings there? Are they true? About every Native American culture talks about small beings that live in the forest. The Cherokee mentioned them, along with so many more of the other ones. And like I said, the Delaware called them Tunganaxi. So what is that? What people are seeing at the Anderson Mounds is Tunganaxi, the wood dwarfs. Never been to Anderson Mounds. Maybe now would be a good time to go up there. You might want to go up there and open the air, and you can walk around and keep an eye out for the little blue men up at the mound. Tell me what you see. Now, so there again, there's that thing about it having some bearing in truth. And but now I'm going to tell you another story. This is a Native American story. It's not a scary story, unless it just depends upon, I guess if you were one of the participants in the story itself, it might be scary to you, because it's a very old tale, and it takes place on the northeast seaboard of the Atlantic Ocean in a bay. And it was a beautiful little bay, and life and for the tribe that was there. And it was an ancient and old tribe. The tribes that lived there, like the Abenaki and the other one, they probably didn't even know the names of these people. But as the story came down through time and stuff, the story is about a young warrior whose name was called Strongwind, the Invisible. And Strongwind and the Invisible and his sister lived in a small hut, as you might call it, or a wigwam, but they lived there along the banks in that secluded bay, away from the main part of the village. And everyone thought that Strongwind was the strongest and most handsome and bravest of all the warriors. And Strongwind was never defeated in battle, and he always helped his people to whenever they needed that help. And one of the reasons was because Strongwind had an ability, a power, so to speak. Strongwind could make himself invisible. And whenever things and word was around that maybe another tribe or something was seeking to harm them or to come in, that Strongwind could walk into their camp and never be seen and overhear their plan. And that's why he was always victorious, and that's why he was the warrior that he was. But he was very strong in character and honor. And all the young maidens in the area wished to take Strongwind as their husband. But Strongwind's sister was very protective of her brother, because he knew that many people would try to take advantage of him and his power and the things that he could do. So whenever they would come seeking Strongwind's hand, Strongwind's sister was always asking him a question, because see, Strongwind would go out hunting or maybe fishing in the tidal pools and stuff like that, and bring back mussels and shells and things, clams and things for them to prepare and to eat. And many times when he returned, he would return along the banks and the shore of the bay there, and he always pulled a sled with him, because if he took any game or anything like that, he would put it in the sled and pull it home. Now, Strongwind many times would go out, and he would as he came back, he would make himself invisible when he walked along the shore. And his sister was the only person that could see Strong Wind, even when he was invisible. So when the young maidens would come from the village seeking Strong Wind's hand in marriage, she would ask them questions. And she would say, "Oh, here comes my brother now. Do you see him?" And of course, the young maiden would look, and she couldn't see Strong Wind, but she wanted to win his hand in marriage. So she would say, "Oh, yes, I see Strong Wind." Well, the sister says, "Well, if you can see my brother, with what does he pull his sled?" And she said, "Well, he pulls a sled with a rawhide tug, just like everybody else." And with what does he string his bow? And the young maiden would say, "Well, he strings his bow like all the other warriors do. He strings his bow with a twisted cord of sinew." Well, his sister would know that they were lying, because that was not the truth. Well, all the maidens, one by one, came to seek the hand of Strong Wind. And in that village, there were 3 sisters, 2 older sisters and a younger one. And the younger one was very beautiful, very kind of heart, and very gentle. And she was actually their father's favorite. And the 2 older sisters were jealous of her. They were jealous of her beauty and of her softness and her tenderness and her good heart and her loving spirit. And they would torment her, and they would tear her clothes, and they would even push her into the fire and take coals. And they got so that they would take coals and burn her face. And when their father would ask about it, they would say, "Oh, she has fits, and she does that, and she throws herself in the fire." And she wouldn't even speak up in her own behalf. Well, the 2 sisters decided that they would go and they would try. Of course, they tried like all the others. They answered the questions incorrectly, like all the others, because they could not see Strong Wind. Now, as time went by, the only one that was left, one that had never gone, was the younger sister. And she made it known one day, though she never was very boisterous or bragged about anything. She was quiet and meek of spirit. But she let know that she was going to go seek the hand of Strong Wind. Now, everyone laughed and said, "Strong Wind, he had his choice of all the beautiful girls in the village, and look at you, your scarred face and your sooty clothes and your torn buckskins." He said, "Why would Strong Wind even think about taking someone like you as a wife?" And nonetheless, she said that she was going to go and she would try. So she went to the bay, and she approached their wigwam. As always was his custom, Strong Wind was coming back, and he was walking along the bay, the shore, and he was invisible. And his sister looked and saw him coming from far away, and she asked that young maiden, she said, "Do you see my brother? Do you see Strong Wind?" And the young maiden, she looked and she looked and she looked as hard as she could, but she said, "No, I cannot see your brother." And Strong Wind's sister waited a while until he even got closer. And when he got very close, he said, "Do you see my brother now?" And she said, "No, I still do not see your brother." And Strong Wind had come close enough that he could hear the young maiden, and he heard her speak the truth. And by doing so, he revealed herself to her. And the sister asked once again, "Now, do you see my brother?" And she said, "Oh, yes, I do. I see Strong Wind." And the sister asked, "Well, with what does he draw his sled?" And she said, "He pulls his sled with a rainbow." And the sister smiled and said, "And tell me truthfully, with what does he string his bow?" And she says, "It's the Milky Way." And she knew that Strong Wind had revealed himself to her, because the young maiden at first had spoke the truth, and her heart was good and pure. And Strong Wind's sister had a power of her own. And she washed the young girl's face and washed all of her scars away, and combed her dark black raven hair, and it gleamed and shined once again, and dressed her in her most beautifully beaded and adorned buckskin. And her and Strong Wind were wed. And as time passed by, she had told Strong Wind what happened to her when she was younger and how her sisters mistreated her. Well, Strong Wind went, and with his power, he took those two sisters and he planted them in the ground, and he turned them into aspen trees. And that's why, to this very day, whenever Strong Wind is near, the aspens quake in fear. Like I said, that wasn't scary unless you're the two older sisters. Then it ended up being very scary to them. Now, I like that story because of the moral of it and the ending of it. But the Delaware tell a story. They have a story about a mermaid. Now, many of the woodland tribes and other tribes, they talked about creatures that they believed that lived in very, very deep water. And some of them referred to them as water panthers. And I've seen where they would do quill work on bags and things and stuff like that. And many of the tales and things that they would tell have a meaning, have a moral, have a reason for telling it. And many of the stories like that that the Native Americans tell are very much like that. Many of them have a moral to it. Many of them have a reason to tell them. It's something to teach the children, and it's a good way to teach them because it holds their interest and they listen very intently. And this is a story of Wotinowus. Wotinowus in the Delaware culture was a mermaid. But you'll see, long ago, when the Delaware were young, there was a young couple, a young man and a woman that wished to be married. But many of the elders and stuff of the tribe were a little bit hesitant and reluctant to give them permission to marry. They just had a strange feeling about things and did not know that it would be a good union. But seeing how much they loved one another, they allowed the union to take place. And shortly after that, a year or so had passed, and the young maiden was to give birth, and they were both so excited and anxious. But when the child was born, it was different than other children. They had given it the name Wotinowus, but little Wotinowus, like I said, was not like any other child. Wotinowus was half human and half fish. And that embarrassed her mother. And at first, her mother would keep her locked away or inside the wigwam and would never bring her out because she was embarrassed by her. But as time went on, there was something about the child, something in her, something about her that began to scare even her own mother. And she got very frightened of the child. So her mother decided that one evening, when it was very dark and the village was very quiet and everyone else was asleep, she slipped down to the shores of the Great Lake and she threw little Wotinowus in. Now, her intent was for Wotinowus to drown, but if you remember, Wotinowus was half fish, so Wotinowus did not drown, but she went to the deepest and darkest and coldest depths of that Great Lake. And there she stayed in that cold and darkness. And she grew in size and in strength. And her heart grew as cold as those icy waters. And in her welled up a great hatred for all things human. Because was it not her human mother that cast her into the lake to die? So when Wotinowus was big enough and strong enough, she waged war on anyone that would come down to the river, and she would slink up from the depths and grab them by their ankles and their legs, and she would pull them down to a dark and cold grave and drown them in the depths of the lake. And it got so that they couldn't even go down to wash or to bathe or to fish, and the water was so important to them. And so they called a great council. What could they do? Because all the warriors went against her, and her scales and her flesh was so hard. Her scales were like armor. There was nothing that was fashioned by them that could pierce her scales. And so they called that great council, and people came, and warriors from all around. And two young warriors said that they stepped forward, and they said that they had a plan, that they believed that they could defeat Wattinowus, they could kill Wattinowus. And they said, well, tell us what your plan is. All of our strongest and best warriors, and none of our weapons can harm her. What is it that you believe that you can do? And the two young warriors said, we'll go to the sun, and we'll ask the sun for his ashes, and we will bring his ashes to earth and cast them in the water, and surely the water will boil, and the firmament will make a great heat, and that will kill Wattinowus. And the people thought that was a good idea, and they gave their permission. And they said, if you do, said, we'll give you many gifts, and we will sing your praises and tell your story throughout all time. So the two young warriors went to the highest point they could find, and there they waited for a huge, strong, dark cloud, and they leapt upon the cloud, and they rode it all the way to the sun. And when they got to the sun, they told the sun what had happened, and they told the sun how Wattinowus was evil and how she destroyed and killed the people and kept them from the water that they needed. And the sun agreed, oh, yes, that Wattinowus must die. But he refused to give the young warriors his ashes. And they said, well, you agreed that she was evil. Something must be done. Why will you not give us your ashes? And the sun said, it's because my ashes are so powerful that if you threw them in the waters on earth, that all life on earth would cease to be. And then they said, well, what can we do? Is there nothing that we can do? And he said, you can go to my brother, the moon, who is but a reflection of me, and ask him for his ashes. So they went to the moon, and they told him about Wattinowus and the story and the things that she had done, and he agreed and gave him some of his ashes. And they returned to the earth, and they gathered up all the people, and they went down to the shores of the great lake, and there they threw the moon's ashes into the water, and the water began to boil and seethe and begin to bubble and swirl. Great steam began to come up from the water, and it boiled, and a great geyser shot forth, and in that geyser was Wattinowus herself, and her scales were falling from her flesh, and she cried out a curse to all the people. She said, you have killed me, Wattinowus, but you have not killed my children, and my children inhabit all the waters of the world. And my children from this day forth will take your children. And that is why the Lenape people and many of the woodland cultures and other Native Americans, whenever they cross a large body of water that is very deep, they will make an offering of a fine piece of clothing or food or something to appease the children of Wattinowus. And it teaches the young ones to stay away from the deep water. Now, you can choose to believe this story or not. But you know, the weather's warming up and people are getting out. You might want to go to a lake or a river or a stream and cool your feet and toes in the cool water in the hot summer air. But should you feel something brush against your leg or tickle your toes, you might want to get out. So not quite the mermaid that most people are aware of. So now, like I said, the weather's warming up. Things are becoming, I noticed the other night myself, bugs and things are out, and the trees are blooming, and things are looking all green and good. And I have another story that I'll tell about that I like very much, and it's another Native American story, but it's about a group of Indians that lived up around the Great Lakes, and a very old group of Indians. Like I said, again, their names, whatever they called themselves, have been lost to us over time. But in that area up there around the lakes, the land was beautiful. The forest was full of food and game, and the soil was rich, and you could grow anything that you wanted to. And it was said of the lake itself that the fish were so plentiful in the lake that you could walk across the lake on the backs of fishes. Now, in this village, there was a young couple, and they wished to get married, but because they were of the wrong clans, and they were not allowed to. So the young man, out of despair and a broken heart and downhearted, he left and went far north of the village. And as far as anyone ever knew, they never saw him ever again. But now, about 2 years after that happened, that young maiden that wished to marry that young man, she disappeared. She just left the village one day and never returned. Well, everyone thought, oh, this was their plan all along, because we wouldn't allow them to get wed, that he went ahead and made a place for her. And then if she was to follow after. And that might have been true, except for the fact that other people became missing for no apparent reason. Older people of the village and even young children. Sometimes the hunters would come out. If one or two went out by themselves, they would not return. And things began to change. Not only the people began to become missing, but game became scarce, and it didn't seem to be the fish in the lake like there once was. And the weather was turning terrible and bad, and very, a winter was setting in like one that they had never felt before. The young hunters and young men had to venture farther and farther away from the village to even find anything that they could sustain themselves on. And they needed to fill their supplies and stuff before the hard winter set in. And one day they went out farther than they had ever gone before. And they came upon a grisly sight, because there was a little clearing in the forest, and there about the clearing was just strewn all about were the bones of animals. And some of them had not been completely eaten. Some of them had just been partially eaten. And the bones were gnawed upon and broken open, and the very marrow was sucked from the bones. And as they began to look, they noticed that it was not only the bones of animals, but it was the bones of those that had gotten lost or disappeared. And they too had been feasted upon and gnawed upon by some beast, some creature that they knew not what. So they went back and they gathered together with the elders when they got back to the village, and they told them what they had found. And the elders said that it sounded like the work of what they knew to be from the stories that they had heard from their grandfathers, that it was a Windigo. Now some cultures believe that Windigos were once human. Others believe that they are a terrible spirit of the forest. But whichever they are and how they came to be, they are a terrible being or spirit of the forest. And a Windigo feasts upon the flesh of man, but the more he eats, the more he wants, and the more that he eats, the less that he is satisfied. And he is gaunt. He looks more like a creature of starvation, even though that he is huge in size and tall in stature. But his flesh literally hangs from his bones, and you can see those bones and stuff. And his desire, his hunger for flesh is unsatiable. Now, when they were told this, they thought, how can we ever stand against a creature such as this? Now, and they didn't want to leave their beloved homeland, but they didn't think that they had another choice. But the elders told him, well, you can kill a Windigo if you can destroy his heart. And they told him how to do it. And after the elders had told the young warriors how to do it, they went set about to prepare to do it. And they dug a great pit in the ground. And in that pit, they threw all manner of dried leaves and grasses and twigs and large logs, anything that would burn with a great heat. And then they covered the area over and made it look like the ground had not been disturbed. But they did it in a way to where if anything stepped on it, it wouldn't hold the weight of the slightest little creature. And two of the young men that were braver than the others decided that they would entice the Windigo to come. And they positioned themselves where he would have to come across that pit. And they took their stone-bladed knives and they cut their arms and let the blood flow a bit. And they held their arms high into the air and let the breeze and the currents of the air waft and take that smell, that scent of the human blood across the air. And as it did, it reached to Windigo. And because of his great desire to devour human flesh, he could not resist. And he came and he appeared there before them in all of his hideous sight and strength and size. And he sniffed the air. And when he smelled that blood, he lunged towards those two young warriors. And when he did, he fell in the pit. And the other ones ran from seclusion, and they had torches, and they took those torches and they threw them into the pit, and they set the brush and the logs and the twigs and all that on fire, and it began to burn with a great heat. And as it was burning, they looked into the fire, and they could see the Windigo itself, and his putrid flesh was falling from his bones, and in his rib cage there, they could see his black heart, but it still beat. Dum, 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 dum. But as the fire grew hotter, his heart began to glow, and it began to glow as bright as the coals themselves. And they heard dum, 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 dum. And when his heart glowed white like the very surface of the sun, right before his heart disintegrated, he called out a curse to all the people. And he said, "You have killed me, but you will never kill my spirit. And it will dwell upon earth forever, feast upon man, and torment him for all time." And at that moment, his heart burst into a billion burning embers, and the wind carried it high into the air. And as the currents brought it back to the earth, each one of those embers, when they fell to the ground, turned into the first mosquitoes. So now when you're out this summer and sitting around a nice little campfire telling your own stories or tales, and an old mosquito lights upon your arm, remember the story that I just told you, and remember the curse that the Windigo gave unto the people. And I think you will decide, as I have, he kept his word. All right. Well, I'm going to tell you one more story, hopefully. And this is told not far, well, it's pretty far from here. You get down around the Ohio River, down around Madison, that area down in there. You'll find that there are many caves down in there. You probably heard of Squire Boone's caverns and Wyandotte caverns and all those different things. There are a lot of caves down there along that river. Many people, a lot of, caves are very interesting. I find them to be very interesting, but they can also be sort of dark and scary places. But there are also beautiful forests and beautiful woods down there in the road, in the hills and stuff, and it's a beautiful part of Indiana. Now, this story comes from a little time back. An old gentleman, I don't even know if anybody still even remembers his name, but an old fella. They said he once was a pretty prosperous businessman, but he kind of got tired of all that stuff and decided to, he liked to hunt, he liked to fish, and he liked to do all those things. So he decided he'd just, leave the society that he knew behind and go build him a little cabin in the woods and live up in there with his old hound dogs and live off of the land and plant himself a little garden and just live that way, the way that he began to think that man was intended to live. So he found him a nice secluded spot, not far from the river, back up in the woods, a little beautiful place that sat upon a little hill and knoll, and he cleared him out a place. And next to his house, he built himself a little garden, and he would grow all kinds of vegetables and things in the garden. Now, and he would hunt and fish for the other food that he needed. And in the warmer months, things were fine, and he didn't want for anything. But in the cold months, he found that it's kind of scarce, hard to get game. Well, he would have to venture further and further, and time went on. He had one old hound dog left, and they went out one day and didn't find anything, came back, and they're still both very hungry. And he lived in a little one-room cabin that he built. That one room was his bedroom, his dining room, his kitchen, and it was all in one, and he had him a fireplace there. Well, him and the old dog that night, they went to bed hungry. Now, he had fallen off to sleep, and he heard a scuffling in the house. He heard a rustling. And when he sat up in bed and he looked and he saw a dark shadow skid across the wall of the cabin from the little light that was left in the fire. And when he looked into the darkness and he peered there, he could see like two red glowing eyes. It looked like a thing nearly about as big as his hound, but short and stubby with a long tail and eyes that kind of had a red glow to it. And it scared him. It gave him chills. And there next to his bed, he had a little axe, and he picked it up and he threw it at that creature. And the creature let out a bawl, and ran out through a hole that he had scratched through that wall. And when he got up, no fellow went over there. He was quick, but that old thing was quicker. And he had missed him altogether, except for the fact that he had cut off his tail, and his tail was wriggling on the floor. And he kicked it over in the fireplace, stuffed up the hole that the critter got in. Oh, his stomach was still hurting, still hungry, still wanting something to eat. Now, he got to smell it. He kicked that old tail over in there, but that thing got to cooking in them coals, and it smelled like a big old nice cut of sausage. Man, he grabbed that thing out because he was so hungry, and he scraped and got all the hair off of it and cooked that thing, threw it in the pot, and he ate it up. And man, he was so full. That tastes like some of the finest sausage he ever ate. So he laid down in that bed and went to sleep. But he didn't really get all the way to sleep. He got about half asleep. And he heard a scratching outside, scratching on like something scratching at the wall, trying to get in. And he sat up in bed and thought he heard something other than that scratching. Something sounded on the wind, and it said, "Taily-po, taily-po. I want my taily-po." "Calico," he called, "holler for that hound." The dog run out from under the porch and chased that critter all the way off down in the swamp. Got so far away he couldn't even hear. He thought old Calico, he'd done him a good job then. He felt better, so he lay back down, pulled them covers up about him, dozed off to sleep. But then here it come again. This time it was at the door. "Get on away from here." "Taily-po, taily-po. I want my taily-po." Called for his old hound again. Boy, Calico done his job. He run them off all through the yard. They run all the way through the fence so hard that they broke the gate off the hinges. Well, he knew that old thing was gone now. So he went on back to sleep, and he said, but he's kind of scared. He didn't know whether he ought to go to sleep or not. And he just thought, if I can make it till daylight, I'll be all right. I'll be okay. And he's sitting up in the bed, but he's so tired and had that full tummy. And he just fell off back to sleep again. But then he heard something inside the cabin. Something had knocked over the pan up in the cupboard. And there was a scratching on the floor. And he looked up, and there's just a little glint of light coming through the cracks in the cabin wall. But then he looked down at the foot of his bed. He heard a little scraping. and he saw these hand-like paws come up over the foot of his bed with long claws on the end of them and two long pointy ears. And then he saw those eyes that had a glint of red. And then he saw that mouth full of teeth. And he saw the creature said, Tailipo, Tailipo, I come to get my Tailipo. He was so afraid he just pulled that cover all up over him like that, curled up in a ball and sat there underneath the cover, laid there like that, scared to death. And he could feel that thing crawl up in the bed with him. And it run his hand up under the cover and over his side. And it rubbed his belly and said, Tailipo, Tailipo, there's my Tailipo. Well, time went on. Old folks that used to go by there found the old cabin door wide open. No sign of the old man or his hound dog. Looked like there'd been a terrible scuffle in there. And as time went on, the old cabin kind of deteriorated. And to this day, there's nothing left there but the old fireplace. And many old coon hunters and other folks just walking through the woods and deer hunters and stuff, a lot of times they say that they'll walk by that old man's place. All that's being left is that chimney to show them where it is. But late in the evening, about twilight, in that time between light and dark, on the breeze, many of them say they think they hear something on the wind that sounds like Tailipo, Tailipo. I got my Tailipo. Thank you. Good night. I'm glad you joined us. Thanks.